Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Andrea Weckerly, and welcome to the Ready Living podcast, where each episode is designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to create the life you want. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe for free on your favorite platform. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Sokira, a board-certified music therapist, educator, and leader dedicated to using music as a force for healing and connection. She's the owner and CEO of Connecticut Music Therapy Services, where her team provides life-changing services across the state. Known internationally for her expertise in trauma-informed care, her work grew from both personal and professional experience, including her long-term involvement in community healing after the 2012 Sandy Hook tragedy. She has created specialized training programs, including the Certificate in Trauma-Informed Music Therapy, through her continuing education company, Enlighten CE, and has taught at several universities on topics such as music therapy ethics, music and disability justice, and trauma-informed care. A frequent presenter and author, she also co-designed the American Music Therapy Association Symposium, bringing together therapists worldwide. Beyond her professional roles, she is an advocate for inclusive, sustainable practice and a passionate believer in the power of music to support resilience and hope. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Let's start out with what makes music so powerful. Why does it reach places that words alone and ordinary conversations can't?
So that's a great question. What we're learning more and more has to do with the way the brain processes music. The brain lights up in so many more areas with music than it does with any other stimuli. Music has always been an important part of who we are as humanity. It's something that has helped us build and maintain our societies. It is something that brings us together. It is something that can help us communicate our relationships and our culture and our stories. And it helps us understand who we are as individuals. It looks different depending on the culture and the society in which you were raised. When we look back at history, there's something about music that lights up every part of our brain. So we're able to move differently. We are able to connect differently. We are able to experience emotions differently when music is part of what we're experiencing.
People who are unfamiliar with music therapy might assume it means sitting in a room listening to soothing music. Can you explain what music therapy actually is and how it works?
I think it gets confusing to people because we all have an innate sense that music helps us. So when people hear the terminology music therapy, they go, "Oh, I do that for myself." I teach a course with freshmen at one of the universities where I teach, and most of them haven't had too much exposure to music therapy, but they all think that music helps them. Sometimes actually music therapists do use quiet music to help people relax, but that's just one of a very, very large number of ways in which we work. So we're not just using music to bring folks' activation level down. We also sometimes are using music to help people increase their activation level, but also communicate, understand their emotions, move, heal. There's a much larger scope of what we do. And it involves not just the person and their music, it involves us as a therapist. There's a three-way relationship between the client, the therapist, and the music. The therapist brings their musical self into the picture. You need to have an actually qualified therapist for it to be music therapy.
Is music therapy then a relatively new therapeutic approach, or has it been around for a while?
When you look at history, you'll see that there's examples of using music therapeutically or helpfully all the way back to the Phoenicians, all the way back even before then. And probably starting in the 1800s, we start to see in the history, in the literature, that medical practitioners and folks who are interested in researching are starting to pay attention. And as we moved through the 1800s into the 1900s, multiple scientists and clinicians were taking a look at this and actually beginning to kind of organize themselves. It was in the 50s that it finally took root and held as a more organized profession. There were university programs that were now studying this and a need for more clear guidelines and training parameters for folks to become actually a professional within this field. A couple of my colleagues have been researching the role of women in the early 1900s. And what we've really realized is that paving the way for all of that to start were multiple women sort of founders of the field who did really important work in hospitals, in psychiatric hospitals with veterans, and who have paved the way for the profession to become an organized profession where we are actually training and have clinical training guidelines and then ultimately certifying people who are qualified to work in music therapy.
So, who can benefit from music therapy? And can you elaborate a little bit on some of the physical, emotional, and life challenges where music therapy has been shown to make a real difference?
We work in so many places. Most life challenges are and can be addressed with music therapy. We work everywhere from neonatal intensive care unit all the way through to end of life care with hospice and folks at the end of life. In the neonatal intensive care unit, music therapy is used for vital stimulation to help the babies be in a state where they are best able to thrive, able to be in a physiological place where they're able to begin to grow, develop, learn, practice their suck, swallow, breathe reflex, finish their development outside of the womb. And at the same time, it can be really, really impactful for the parents who are in a significantly stressful postnatal time. That's one place where we have some really wonderful research and clinical practice taking place. In my private practice, we do a lot of school-based work, and the goals tend to fall under the areas of improving communication, improving cognitive and academic skills, working with fine gross motor skills, as well as developing leisure skills through music. There's a ton of ways that we will collaborate with other professionals in the school setting to create a goal program that is motivating and interesting, that captivates the energy and interest of the clients and take advantage of their public education.
Is that something any student within a school is allowed to avail themselves of?
That's an important question. So it depends on the school district. There are some school districts who will bring in music therapy programmatically and offer it in a more liberal kind of way. And then there's other situations in which it can be documented that they need to have music therapy to be able to meet their educational needs, in which case the district would do an evaluation with a music therapist with the child, and we would determine if it was appropriate as a related service, which would fall under 504 and special ed within their rights of being a student.
One of the most fascinating things I've learned is that music therapy can actually help people manage chronic pain and even lower pain perception after surgery, helping them recover faster.
I had the privilege of working with Dr. Cheryl Dillio in my master's degree and take some wonderful coursework on music therapy at end of life and music therapy in pain. Because I don't use that type of work on a day to day, I'm going to be very brief. Part of it is the distraction. Your brain can only be paying attention to so much at any time. If music is taking up more of that space, the perception of pain is not going to be taking up that space.
Another thing I found exciting is evidence that suggests listening to music can help restore neurochemical balance, even with conditions like trauma and depression, which leads me to your background and training. You specialize in trauma informed care, and I read that your clinical work primarily focuses on helping people who have experienced trauma, complex trauma, and PTSD using music psychotherapy methods. How did you end up focusing on that?
I happen to live near Sandy Hook. And in 2012, when the shooting happened, it wasn't really even a question in my mind that I need to figure out how to help the community. I was very much at the time working as a clinician, doing work in school based settings. I was also doing some work at end of life sessions, working on helping people completing their relationships with their family members, for example, sometimes managing their pain and discomfort and managing the emotions and comfort that's needed within that setting. So I was sort of in both of those places, and I have my own young kids at the time. Anybody who lives in Sandy Hook, Newtown, the local communities will be able to tell you how they felt, what it was like that day. And for me that day, it had a lot to do with getting calls from our national organization, getting calls from multiple places. Are you okay? Are your kids okay? Your staff okay? And we happen to not work for that school district. So that was fortunately an answer that was easy to give. Anyway, I knew I had to do something, and I knew that would require additional training. I had a chance to work at the Resiliency Center of Newtown, which was grant funded, and it was primarily focused on non-traditional therapies for trauma, which was needed because not everybody responds as well to talk therapy. So we had art therapy, play therapy, and music therapy as regular offerings. A lot of the knowledge that we have about trauma has really been emerging since the time I finished my master's degree in music therapy. And so it's not that nobody prepared me. Nobody else had this knowledge yet either, that trauma is part of a lot of their clients' experiences. Trauma-informed care came out in a bigger way. It had existed since about 2020 and only a little bit published about it. And then around 2014, SAMHSA, the United States Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Agency, published and promoted it. That was right at the beginning when I was working at Resiliency Center, and we were really thinking and trying and working hard to make our programs as accessible and safe as possible. It gave us a little bit of structure in terms of how we were thinking about not re-traumatizing our clients as we designed community programs and camps and outings. What were the things we needed to put in place as clinicians to make our offerings as safe as possible? It helped me think about, what does my therapy room need to look like? What colors should I have in there? What instruments should I avoid? How do I talk to a client who's not ready to talk about what happened? As we talked about, music therapy is all about the musical relationships. So how do I make that musical relationship as safe and secure as possible? So when the client is ready to get to the point of processing their trauma, how do we then move forward from there? Set up a situation where they'll feel as supported as they can.
I imagine there's quite a lot of people who realize they need help, they want help, but they're not necessarily at a place where they feel comfortable putting into words the experiences that they've gone through.
That's exactly right. And in fact, when someone's in a trauma response, the part of their brain that they use to talk, it's not operating. That's part of our brain that gets shut down when we're in a serious trauma. So indeed, there are no words. So having other outlets like music, like art, like other creative practices can be really important. But it needs to be with a professional trained to be able to hold that space and that energy of the trauma when it does get expressed through the music.
We know that trauma often lives in the body, and certain songs or sounds can even trigger painful memories. So, how do you help clients engage with music in a way that feels safe and empowering rather than re traumatizing? Hearing a sound or hearing music that is associated with a particular time or event.
What I hear you asking is, what do you do when someone gets really activated? I try to use activated as a word, but people use the word triggered too. It can be by the music, and it can be by something that's happening in the music therapy environment. From a trauma-informed perspective, the first step is to actually just recognize what's happening is happening. That what's happening isn't a behavior. It isn't somebody acting out. It isn't somebody who is trying to manipulate you. It is actually just in that moment realizing something is going on that could be related to trauma, and that whatever the stimuli that is causing this is causing potentially additional harm to that person. And so it needs to stop. Now, where you would move from there will depend on if you are in a setting where it is appropriate to address that, or whether you are in a setting, whether it is appropriate to refer that to another situation. So if I'm working in a public school setting, my goal for being there is to help them with their educational needs, not to help them process their trauma. Therefore, in that setting, if a kid becomes highly activated into a trauma response, or what I perceive as a trauma response, I'm going to do what I can to help them get back into their body, to be safe in the setting, etc. But then I'm going to talk with the team member that would be in charge of making sure that that kid gets what they need. That's not an educational thing, that's a psychotherapy thing. On the other hand, if someone has come to me in my private practice, as they do because music is activating to them or they've had a traumatic experience, if we're in therapy where the client becomes activated, we're not going to necessarily just try to get safe and move on. We are going to try to understand it and process it. And I can do that because I have had the training. But music therapy is a big field. So that's not something we're doing everywhere. That's why I did my dissertation. Dealing with community tragedy, dealing with community trauma response for so long, I put pieces together that were enough for me to understand the work I was doing and conceptualize my work and identify what parts of my work were trauma informed versus trauma focused and what competencies I needed to be in those kind of spaces. Because what happened after Sandy Hook was that every time there was another shooting, someone would call me. So I was putting all of this stuff together for myself and realized I had an educational question that was really starting to bubble up, which is how can we do this better? And so I chose to do my doctoral work in education, an EDD, and I went to Alverno College, which is a place that also is very familiar with music therapy. It's actually one of our first several music therapy programs in the country. And I spoke with multiple educators as well as multiple early career professionals to understand their perspectives on trauma-informed care in a way that is current to education as it's been happening in the last several years. So it's really brought trauma more into the forefront of what we're discussing, what we're thinking about, what we're knowing. The framework of trauma-informed care is really well embraced across the board, but systemically, there's a lot of barriers to us incorporating this within higher education in general, as well as within music therapy education. Those are my next steps in terms of what I'm thinking about, what I'm going to present on and publish about, and the work I want to do to try to encourage our systems to continue to improve. Another thing that is true that I know at a deeper level, having done the research, is that it's not just about trauma-informed care. It's also where that overlaps with our cultural, historical, and gender experiences. It's where it overlaps with the ways that we work in the world with each other. You can't be harming somebody and helping them at the same time. So paying attention to the places where we're able to teach and be therapists from a more culturally relevant and humble standpoint is really important.
Do clients or patients have to have some sort of particular music ability to benefit from music therapy?
No, we believe everybody's musical. I get so mad about things like The Voice and American Idol. I'm a vocalist. I love to hear singers. I don't like, let's judge it. Let's put you down. That's not what music is for. There is an industry, which is its own system that has all kinds of oppressions and stuff like that built into it, which makes it harder for people to put their music out there in the world. But at the end of the day, you are a musician if you have a heartbeat. You have a rhythm inside of you. You breathe to a rhythm. There is a tempo to the way your life works. There is melody in your communications and in your speaking voice. There is inborn, natural, you don't even have to try, you are musical. The idea that we would remove that ownership of music from humans does not sit well with me, nor does it sit well with, I don't think, any of my colleagues. It is something that is natural to everyone. I could be with a client at the end of their life, training my guitar playing with their breathing, and they are a contributor to that music.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Is there one particular style of music that's more therapeutic than another?
No. there is not. What is, I think, key and what we understand from the research as it emerges is client preferred music does have an effectiveness that is different than if we brought in an outside something. Now, this does not mean that the therapist doesn't choose music sometimes, but the choosing is even attuned with who the client is and how they're going to work and what they need.
If someone is listening today and feels drawn to try music therapy, is it something that people can seek out directly, or do they need a referral, or what do they do?
So, a lot of folks who are listening would most likely self refer. American Music Therapy Association will provide referrals in your area. And you can also do your own research. AMTA is at musictherapy.org. You would want to make sure that the person does minimally have the credential MT-BC, which stands for Board Certified Music Therapist, which is given through the Certification Board of Music Therapists, and they're at cbmt.org. Make sure that somebody does have the credentials. And then you're going to want to make sure you talk to the music therapist to make sure they have the experience and training that will meet your unique needs. We also are now more than ever more accessible because over COVID, you figured out very effectively in many places how to use music therapy using Zoom. So you're not as dependent necessarily on accessing a music therapist in your local area. You don't have to necessarily drive an hour and a half anymore, which is nice.
Are there ways to use music for self care? And if so, do you have any suggestions for mindful ways to engage with music for stress reduction or emotional regulation at home?
Some of us do this just in a natural way. So build on what you do already. Sometimes it's about choosing the right music for where you are. One of the things we know is that the brain holds on to music in a way it doesn't with other things like spoken language, which is why we see folks who've even lost a lot of functions, with dementia or Alzheimer's, can still sing all of the words to certain songs. I encourage people to trust themselves and what they need. I like to make playlists. And so if I'm going through an experience, I look for songs that sort of hold different facets of that experience, and I gather them together and I name the playlist something that I will remember what that playlist is about. In my day-to-day life, I also will put things on just to wind down, just to have something to stop my train of thought, which doesn't easily do on its own. So, really being mindful of how the music is impacting you. If it is a piece of music that's a lot of feelings with this, I'm going to come back to that another time. That's okay. You can know what you're needing in that moment and trusting yourself to give it to you.
You've spent your career helping people use music as a tool for healing, connection, and growth. And so, after all of these years, 20 plus, what has this work taught you about the human spirit?
That it's very resilient. There's so many different little kind of moments, but they exist over periods of time in periods of relationship. One of the great honors of my life is to get to make music alongside with people as they're figuring out their direction, as they're being brave and going there when they need to address the work that they're doing. I work with primarily trauma survivors. When you do that over time and you have these long-term relationships with clients, to see how they then move forward and then create what their next steps are in the world, it's just an honor because you can sit back and just feel a sense of pride in them, knowing how hard they worked to get to the point where they could do what they're doing. So just to be able to be like a little bit of a door opener and a supporter on that journey, to me, that feels like pretty much one of the biggest honors of my life.
Where can people learn more about your work?
I have a personal website, jennifersokira.com, kind of a combination of my scholarship work as well as my private practice and supervision and publications there. There is also my private practice website is ctmusictherapy.com.
Jen, thank you so much for having taken the time today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.